The India-Canada relationship is in tatters, all because Justin Trudeau wants to score brownie points and Khalistani votes, even if that means shielding terrorists and picking fights with a fellow democracy. He's in trouble at home, so he's kicking up a storm to distract his domestic audience. But what will this mean for Indians living in Canada? And why have Indian investigators gone to the US? We'll bring you the updates and the analysis. Meanwhile, India's External Affairs Minister has landed in Pakistan for the SCO summit, the first Indian leader to go there in 9 years. We will tell you what to expect. North Korea has blown up roads connecting it to the south. We'll discuss why. Will Netanyahu steer clear of Iran's nuclear and oil facilities? He's said to have assured the US, but there's a twist in the tale. In the US election, why Kamala Harris is focusing on male voters, how Africa's race to space is picking pace, and what are pet interns? What does this trend say about China? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Oil prices tumble more than 5% as fears ease over Israeli strikes on Iranian refineries. This follows reports that Israel will target Iran's military and not its crude and nuclear sector. Oil prices were also pushed down by worries about demand in China. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says she will visit Lebanon. Italian troops are stationed there. They are part of UNIFIL, a United Nations mission. The group has accused Israeli forces of firing on peacekeepers. Italy is the second biggest contributor of UNIFIL peacekeepers. The US and the Philippines launch war games. It comes after China held huge drills around Taiwan and a Chinese vessel collided with a Filipino patrol boat in the disputed South China Sea. The focus of the joint drills is to defend Luzon, the largest island in the Philippines. Maldives sacks more than 200 political appointees, including ministers. It's a bid to reduce the expenditure of the cash-strapped nation. Among those sacked are 7 state ministers and more than 40 deputy ministers. President Muizu had appointed them after coming to power last year. And in Myanmar, a fresh setback for the embattled junta. Rebels seize another town along the strategic highway to China. For months now, violence has rocked the northern Shan state, with ethnic armed groups renewing their offensive against the military. The India-Canada relationship has hit rock bottom and Canada is getting the Pakistan treatment from New Delhi. India has recalled 6 of its diplomats from Canada and expelled 6 Canadian diplomats posted in India. It's like Canada is the new Pakistan, shielding terrorists and drawing sharp criticism from India, not to mention the expulsion of diplomats. And there's only one person to blame for all of this: Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. His political agenda and myopia have driven this relationship to the ground. He finally spoke last night and only made the situation worse. Listen to this.
They met with Indian officials to share RCMP evidence which concluded 6 agents of the Government of India are persons of interest in criminal activities. And despite repeated requests to the Government of India, it has decided not to cooperate.
With those remarks, Trudeau added fuel to the fire. Indian diplomats are protected under the Vienna Convention. The Canadian Prime Minister basically called them criminals. His foreign minister went one step further. Her name is Melanie Joly. She talked about imposing economic sanctions on India. I'll tell you the exact words that she used. Everything is on the table. For the record, India is the 5th largest economy in the world. Canada ranks at number 10, so they should save the sanctions rhetoric for someone else. Meanwhile, Trudeau is getting political support from all sides, including Khalistani leader Jagmeet Singh. They were coalition partners, but Jagmeet dumped Trudeau recently. Now he has called for sanctions against India and a ban on the RSS in Canada. The RSS is the ideological mentor of India's ruling party, the BJP. Jagmeet Singh says ban them in Canada. The country's opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, has also supported Justin Trudeau and called for action. India has issued a strong rebuttal to Trudeau's remarks. It has termed Canada's allegations, and I'm quoting from the statement, vague, not true, absurd, and preposterous imputations. In fact, let me quote from the statement further. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau's press conference yesterday was the same old Trudeau saying the same old things for the same old reasons. This is what New Delhi was referring to.
As the RCMP Commissioner stated earlier, they have clear and compelling evidence that agents of the Government of India have engaged in and continue to engage in activities that pose a significant threat to public safety. This includes clandestine information gathering techniques, coercive behavior targeting South Asian Canadians, and involvement in over a dozen threatening and violent acts, including murder.
So what is Trudeau talking about? The killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani terrorist. He was killed in Canada last year. The Trudeau government says it has proof against Indian diplomats that they are involved in the murder of terrorist Nijjar. Specifically, India's top diplomat in Canada, High Commissioner Sanjay Kumar Verma. Canada labelled him and 5 other Indian diplomats as persons of interest in their investigation. Yesterday, Canadian police held a press conference to share this so-called evidence. Now, you would imagine after so much controversy, they would come with solid proof, maybe wiretaps or intercepts or photographs. Let me tell you, they offered none of it. Instead, they went on a long rant of allegations. They accused Indian diplomats of involvement in homicides, extortion and violent acts. These are the words they used: homicides, extortion and violent acts. It's as far-fetched as it gets. And then they struck a self-goal. Listen to this exchange.
We just heard today that India is targeting, using the terminology I'll share, the South Asian diaspora. To be more specific, is the main target of transnational repression or foreign interference and organized crime, including what we just heard, extortions, actually the Sikh Canadian community?
So yes, I mean, it is targeting the South Asian community, but what we've seen is there's specific targeting of pro-Khalistan elements in Canada, or members of the pro-Khalistan movement.
And just for the follow-up, but we're talking about extortions, organized crime being used. We've within the community have seen that folks have been targeted in these incidents are not just people that are linked to the Khalistani movement or the Sikh self-determination movement. Are you able to share that the transnational repression occurring right now is going beyond just Sikhs connected to the Khalistani movement in some shape or form?
So just in order to preserve the integrity of the investigations that are being conducted by our police of jurisdiction partners, I won't be providing any further details.
That's practically an admission. Canada is shielding Khalistanis. Their police is saying it on record. These are Khalistanis who openly call for the breakup of India. These are Khalistanis who celebrate violence against Indian politicians and threaten Indian diplomats. The Canadian police confirmed that Canada is picking a fight with India to protect the very same Khalistanis. Meanwhile, after this blunder, Trudeau is hoping that his allies will stick with him. He's said to have spoken to the US and the UK. Reports say the US is supporting him, but New Zealand is skeptical. Their Deputy Prime Minister issued a statement. His name is Winston Peters. He said these charges, if proven, would be very concerning. The security of Indian diplomats in the meantime is being stepped up. High Commissioner Verma and his 5 colleagues will return to India by the end of this week. They are being given enhanced protection. They have also received threats from Khalistanis. It's a full-blown security and political crisis, and it's entirely Justin Trudeau's making. It's not just Canada. The Khalistani case in America is also moving ahead. This one involves Gurpatan Singh Panu. We've discussed him many times. He's another peaceful Sikh activist leading a human rights group. I'm kidding, of course. He's a bona fide Khalistani terrorist, a man whose life mission is to break India apart. The US claims there was an assassination plot against him. By whom? Well, according to them, India. New Delhi has been cooperating with this investigation. A team from India is in fact visiting the US today. They're expected to share the investigation details with the Americans. And what are these details? Reports say the Indian team has detained a key accused. The US calls him CC1. This CC1 is supposed to be an Indian government official. Washington says he plotted the Panu murder bid. So who was he? US media reports called him Vikram Yadav, an agent of India's spy agency. Apparently, he is no longer part of the Indian government. But the big headline is this: CC1, or the key suspect, has been detained. We'll have to see what he reveals. I must say, though, the Americans are putting in a lot of effort in this case. That too for a designated terrorist. Imagine what they would do if a presidential candidate was targeted. I'm sure they would pull out all the stops. Except they haven't. Donald Trump has faced 3 assassination attempts. Meanwhile, Washington is focused on Gurpatan Singh Panu. He's holed up somewhere in New York, protected by America's laws and ignorance. Chances are the US and Canada are working together on this one. They're very close allies and neighbors. Canada is unlikely to make such a move without consulting Washington. Some Indian officials suspect the same. They called it a joint ambush. I'm sure these investigations will reach their logical conclusion, but tonight we're focusing on the larger issue. How is the West handling Khalistan, or rather mishandling it? You may have heard the classic cliche: one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. The West is applying that logic to Khalistan. Listen to this.
We have an extremely diverse country, and freedom of expression is something that we have, but we will always make sure that we are pushing back against violence and extremism in all its forms.
So we're not going to comment on the unofficial referendum. What I will just say is that broadly across the board, individuals have the right to freedoms of speech, right to peacefully assemble in the United States.
It's not, though, is it? Glorifying assassinations is not freedom, nor is the demand to break India up or threatening Indian diplomats. This is supposed to be really simple stuff, but the West doesn't seem to understand, or maybe doesn't want to understand. They have repeatedly shielded these anti-India elements. Just consider Canada. Since the year 2003, India has sent 26 extradition requests to Canada, 26 requests. That too with evidence, not Justin Trudeau's imaginary kind, real evidence that India gave the Canadians. How many fugitives were returned? Just 6 until 2020. So clearly there is a reluctance to punish Khalistanis, a reluctance that you do not see elsewhere. I will give you an example. In June this year, Canada declared Iran's Revolutionary Guards as terrorists. The group is called the IRGC. It's not some rogue group. It's a legitimate military wing in Iran, like their army or their air force. Many IRGC officers also double up as ministers in the Iranian government. So why did Trudeau designate them? Because of politics, because his ally, the United States, has also done it. Do you see the problem here? Khalistanis openly conduct referendums to break up India. They reenact the assassination of an Indian Prime Minister, yet they get a free pass in Canada, but a legitimate armed wing of a rival country is called terrorist. It's clear evidence of political motivation. India doesn't do that. Just consider last year's Hamas attack on Israel. Hamas is not banned in India. It is not designated as a terror group in India, yet India called the October 7th attack terrorism because that is what it was. But the West will never do that. Like always, they will tell you who's a terrorist or who's a separatist. The nationalists in Quebec are separatists. Hezbollah in Lebanon are terrorists. The Houthis in Yemen are terrorists, but the Khalistanis in the West are not. They are contenders for next year's Nobel Peace Prize. Well, we've got news for them. Times have changed. The world doesn't have to live by Western definitions anymore. You don't decide what qualifies as a threat to India or what constitutes freedom of speech. Just look at this latest statement by Khalistani group SJF, Seeks for Justice. They're setting aside $500,000 in their budget. What for? To track Sanjay Verma, India's High Commissioner to Canada, the same diplomat who's now been recalled. SJF says they will track his whereabouts and bring him to justice. It's basically an open threat, or as Trudeau may call it, a mildly strong opinion. And look at the money. $500,000 is more than 4 crore Indian rupees. That's how much the SJF is spending to track one person. Where is this money coming from? How deep is the Khalistani pocket? At this rate, we will never know. We also don't know why the West refuses to see the truth. Maybe it's vote bank politics, maybe it's ignorance, maybe it's a tactic to put pressure on India. Either way, one thing is certain, this will backfire. When Khalistani gangs overrun Western cities, when they turn their guns on ordinary Canadians and Americans, then the West will realize its mistake. Hopefully, it won't be too late by then. We've discussed the latest developments, we've discussed the root cause. Let's also now talk about the fallout of the India-Canada Row. How will it impact ordinary people, Indians who migrated there and put down their roots, or people who are there for work or study or travel? How will this latest escalation impact their lives? Let's start with the people of Indian origin. These are people who gave up their Indian citizenship or their descendants. So they are Canadian citizens with roots in India. Canada is home to more than 1.8 million of them. They make up about 4% of the country's population, people of Indian origin, 4% of the population. Canada beats both the UK and Australia in terms of hosting people of Indian origin. Then there are the NRIs, non-resident Indians, people who are still Indian citizens but who live in Canada, mostly for work or study. There are more than 1 million NRIs in Canada, again more than the UK and Australia. So combined, you have more than 2.8 million people who could be affected by the India-Canada row. And how could they be affected? Let's start with the visas. Last September, India suspended visa services for Canadian nationals. Canadian citizens could not apply for Indian visas, even from Indian diplomatic missions in third countries. This hit the Indian diaspora the hardest. People with overseas citizen of India or OCI cards were not affected. Neither were those with valid long-term visas. But there were some people of Indian descent who applied for visas last September and they were denied visa services. They had to wait for a few months and try again, and things were arguably worse for Indian students. Last October, Canada recalled its diplomats from India. They were away for a few months, so visa issuance slowed to a crawl. Canada did not suspend visa services outright, but because there were no diplomats at the embassy, at the High Commission here or the other missions, it was almost a de facto suspension. Between October and December 2023, student visas issued to Indians fell by 42%. Thousands of students were rejected as well, meaning that they ended up having to waste an entire semester. And this was bad for both countries. You see, Indian students were forced to waste their time, but Canada also lost on a lot of money. Indians make up the bulk of overseas students in Canada, and they have done for years now. They also pay international student fees, meaning they contribute billions. In 2021, Indian students contributed almost $5 billion to the Canadian economy. That's about a quarter of what Canada earned from all international students. So fewer Indian students is bad for the Canadian economy. Despite this, Canada slowed down the issuance of student visas last year, so the same thing could happen again. And these are the risks on the visa front. But the fallout of this row will not be limited to just travel. Let's look at the broader long-term impact. Who are the Indians in Canada? A large proportion are Sikh people, almost 770,000 by one estimate. This includes both ordinary Sikh people and the Khalistanis. The rest of the diaspora comes from other regions of India, from other communities. So what happens when Justin Trudeau panders to the Khalistani separatists? When he chooses to back the Khalistanis for their votes, what happens then? Obviously, they get emboldened and they start attacking the others. And we've seen this play out too. Khalistanis have been attacking Hindu temples in Canada, and that too quite regularly. They keep vandalizing Hindu places of worship, and there hasn't been any response by Ottawa. How will this impact the long-term safety and security of Hindus in Canada? How will this impact communal harmony? Getting votes is a short-term scheme. But what Trudeau is doing is harming social cohesion, possibly for generations to come.
Potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
Two big democracies are at war, and that too over one man, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. It makes you wonder, what was so special about him? Why did Trudeau pick a fight over his death? First, let's look at his life. Nijjar was born in 1977 in India's Punjab state. He grew up during the period of Khalistani militancy. Chances are that also influenced him. In 1997, Nijjar moved to Canada. He arrived in the country using a fake passport. His plan was to plead for asylum. So Nijjar told authorities that he had been tortured by Indian police, that his family had been arrested. But no one seems to have bought that argument, because in 1998, his request was rejected. He then tried a different strategy. He faked a marriage with a Canadian woman to get citizenship. Again, no luck. Authorities saw through the plan. Plus, the woman herself had just arrived in 1997. Nijjar finally became a Canadian citizen in 2007. It is not clear why his application was accepted. But one thing is clear, many red flags were ignored. Nijjar ended up settling in British Columbia in Canada. That's where he grew into a top Khalistani leader. Initially, he was linked to the Babbar Khalsa International, which is a Khalistani terrorist group. Later on, he started leading the KTF, the Khalistan Tiger Force. And what did he do in this role? In public, he rallied support for Khalistan. He even organized referendums among Sikhs abroad. But away from the public eye, he was up to more sinister stuff. He would recruit vulnerable Sikh youth. He would train them in Canada and then dispatch them to Punjab in India. Reports say that he also visited Pakistan in the last decade, perhaps took help from the ISI, the Pakistani agency. Nijjar's actions alerted the Indian security agencies. In 2007, he was linked to a bombing in Punjab. He was also accused in the assassination of Sikh politicians in India. Put together, he was wanted in dozens of cases. So in the year 2014, Interpol stepped in. They issued a red corner notice for Hardeep Singh Nijjar. It's basically an order to locate and arrest a fugitive. But Canada did not do that. Instead, they put him on a no-fly list. Now, Justin Trudeau was not in power during most of this time. He became Prime Minister only in 2015, at which point the relationship was quite stable. Some disputes did exist over the Khalistan issue, but overall things looked good between India and Canada. Before Trudeau took charge, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had travelled to Canada. New Delhi called it a highly productive trip. But after that, things went downhill. The first red flag was in 2018. Trudeau travelled to India for an official trip. It turned out to be a spectacle. You may remember his awful costumes and over-the-top dances. He was trolled brutally on social media. He was dubbed as fake and annoying. In that same trip, Trudeau made another mistake. He invited a convicted Khalistani terrorist to his reception. After a lot of backlash, the invite was withdrawn, but the damage had been done. Now, here's the thing. Trudeau probably was not in charge of the guest list. Prime ministers don't do that. They do not make a guest list for a dinner. But someone on his team thought it was a good idea. Either they did not know or they did not care, which sums up Justin Trudeau's policy to date. Things got worse after the 2021 election. His party lost its majority in parliament, so Trudeau needed a coalition to stay in power. Enter his Khalistani buddy, Jagmeet Singh of the New Democratic Party. Trudeau used the NDP, the New Democratic Party, to remain Prime Minister. In return, he pushed some of Jagmeet's policies. Maybe Khalistan was part of that deal. Now, all these events make one thing quite clear. Whether it's his antics in India or the invite to a Khalistani terrorist, or his alliance with the NDP, Trudeau has a pretty poor understanding of India. The same goes for people on his staff and his allies. And that's one reason for his Khalistani push. Secondly, it's vote bank politics. Canada's voting patterns have changed in the last decade. In the 2000s, the winning party would have a clear majority, but that does not happen anymore. In 2019, only 1% votes separated the two main political parties. In 2021, after the snap poll, again 1%. As voting margins tightened, Trudeau looked to seek voters. Their numbers had surged during the same period, from 0.9% of the population in 2001 to 2.1% in 2021, the Sikh population in Canada. So Justin Trudeau implemented a number of appeasement measures, even appointed Sikhs to top cabinet posts. In that context, the Nijjar murder was a perfect opportunity for him. He could pitch himself as the defender of Canadians. At the same time, he could court the Khalistani voters. So two birds with one stone. Actually three if you think about it. Canadian intelligence reports had accused China of election meddling. That too in Trudeau's favour. Beijing thought the opposition was too hawkish. So they tried to get Trudeau re-elected. Have you heard the Prime Minister talk about that? Forget Trudeau. Have you heard any Canadian politician talk about that? Why would they? The Nijjar case became an international scandal, so China's meddling became a footnote. The truth is, only Trudeau can explain why he launched this crusade. All we know is that he had reasons to do it, from ignorance to vote bank to distraction. Right now, he is losing horribly in the polls, opinion polls. He is also facing some internal rebellion. Around 20 of his party MPs are said to have signed a letter. They're asking Justin Trudeau to step aside. They want new leadership for the Labour Party. So Trudeau is creating distractions to buy time. In the process, he is running this bilateral relationship to the ground. Vantage continues after a short break.
And date of poll in Maharashtra would be 20th 11. Counting would be on 23rd 11/24, and you will notice that date of poll is Wednesday. This is deliberately, which lot of scheduling, whatever goes into scheduling, we have tried that it is midday so that issue of urban apathy is handled. And in case of urban apathy, we are really very concerned. We want to make appeal through you to all our esteemed voters in the urban areas to please come and vote. It's not a healthy trend which is reflected. If I give you a brief of what is happening across the elections in the urban apathy, we will share this slide with you. If you look at various states, you look at Gurgaon, you look at Faridabad recently. Last elections, you look at Jubilee Hills, Hyderabad. You look at Bangalore South. You look at Gujarat, Gandhigram, Kolaba, Mumbai City, Pune, Thane. All are much below the state averages of each state. We will be conducting a special meeting of the municipal commissioners and DOs within a week's time to appeal again to do whatever we can do to motivate the voters in the urban areas, but the trends are really not good. If I show you the Lok Sabha, that was the Lok Sabha. If I show you legislative assemblies, see the lowest. The Kolaba was just 40%. 62 of 64 urban ACs in Maharashtra were less than the state average in 2019. So was the case in the parliamentary elections 2024 also. And just to give you a contrast, if you compare, so what was the situation in Lok Sabha in Kalyan was 50%, Mumbai South 50, Mumbai North, Thane, Pune, Mumbai South, everything 53%. And these were the lowest 6 parliamentary constituencies out of the lowest 10. So that's the state of the urban apathy. We would be doing everything to counter it. Last time in 24 elections, we had all celebrities, all corporates, Amul, everyone involved. We'll do it again. And we'll also, at this point, emphasize that this contrasts with a very positive trend in the constituencies like Doda, 72%, Riyasi, 74%, Punch, 74%, Rajouri, 71%. If they can go 70 plus, Kulaba can also go 40 plus. In 24 Lok Sabha elections, Bastar was 68%, 69%. Gadchiroli, Manipur, states after state, tough areas. So we'll be requesting through you, we'll have a special drive this time for the slum areas in urban areas and also the colonies, all alike, to have a real urban push. I do not want to name specific thing, but there are booths in Faridabad and Gurgaon in the recently held elections, and they are the poshest places where voting has been around 20%. So again, we will be doing a lot of work on this to do whatever we can do to attract the urban voters. Now, friends, coming to Jharkhand. झारखंड एक बहुत ही समृद्ध स्टेट है, बहुत ही उसकी विरासत है, और वहां पर हम फिर से अपील करेंगे कि सब वोटर्स अधिक से अधिक मात्रा में वोट दें. शेड्यूल वुड बी लाइक दिस. झारखंड वुड बी इन 2 phases. The date of poll, first phase would be on 13th November, and the second phase would be along with Maharashtra on 20th November. And date of counting would be
Now let's turn to Pakistan, the host of this year's SCO summit. That's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's a grouping of 10 Asian nations, including Russia, China, Pakistan and India. I know it does sound a bit odd, but that's just the beginning. The SCO is having a summit today and tomorrow in Pakistan, and India is taking part. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar landed in Rawalpindi today. It's the first visit by an Indian minister since 2015. First in 9 years. Jaishankar landed in Rawalpindi this afternoon. He was given a ceremonial welcome and then he was on his way to the summit. Indian diplomats to Pakistan will likely be supporting him during this meeting. Yes, India does maintain a diplomatic mission in the country, but it doesn't have a High Commissioner. India's last High Commissioner to Pakistan was expelled in 2019 when India revoked Article 370, Kashmir's special status. Since then, the commission has been headed by a deputy high commissioner. So there are Indian diplomats in Pakistan, but the relationship is broken. So Jaishankar's visit is a big deal. Even before he arrived, he managed to cause a splash. Yesterday, we told you how Pakistan's opposition was trying to grab eyeballs. The PTI, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, was supposed to hold a protest. They wanted to highlight the plight of their leader, former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who has been in jail since last August. The stage was set for the protest. The SCO was about to begin. International media would cover them. It was a golden opportunity. But then, a PTI leader made a huge blunder. He invited Jaishankar, the Indian foreign minister, to their protest. That was an amateur move, and Pakistan's government capitalized on it. They've been heaping the pressure on the PTI, so Imran Khan's party has postponed the protest for some minor concessions. So Jaishankar managed to influence Pakistani politics, albeit indirectly, and that too without holding a bilateral. We mentioned this yesterday as well. Jaishankar is in Pakistan strictly for the SCO. There are no bilateral meetings scheduled. India will not talk to Pakistan until Islamabad stops promoting terrorism. Since that is highly unlikely, Jaishankar will only attend to SCO business. Tonight, that means attending a formal dinner hosted by Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. The main SCO summit will take place tomorrow. That's when we'll see results or the lack thereof. The SCO is a complicated group after all. It's supposed to be about economics and trade, but China wants to convert it into an anti-West alliance. India is not interested in that. New Delhi wants to focus on regional cooperation and trade and combating terrorism. But seeing as the summit is being held in Pakistan, that's too much to hope for. It's already obvious that Islamabad has more important things to focus on, like wooing Beijing. Shehbaz Sharif personally welcomed the Chinese Premier Li Qiang yesterday. Pakistan rolled out the red carpet. Chinese and Pakistani flags were flying side by side. It was quite the show, and it continued today. The Chinese Premier virtually inaugurated an airport, the Gwadar International Airport, which was paid for by China, built by Chinese money. Shehbaz Sharif was truly very grateful.
We had very comprehensive discussions during our two sessions today, and without going into any kind of repetition, let me, from the core of my heart, thank President Xi Jinping, thank you and the people of China for your generous gift in the shape of Gwadar International Airport.
With that pomp and pageantry out of the way, the Chinese Premier met with Pakistan's real leadership, their Chief of Army, Asim Munir, and some other junta leaders. So Pakistan is mostly focused on the Chinese Premier's visit. They're probably angling for another loan. Meanwhile, China is enjoying the limelight. It's an ego boost as it tries to reshape the SCO to use it as a forum against the West. And then you have India in the mix. Jaishankar will have to sit through and endure all these grand schemes. It's going to be a long 2 days for the Indian minister. Let's turn our attention to the Korean peninsula, where North Korea has destroyed two major road links. They blew them up. These are roads that connected North Korea to the south. In response, the South Korean military opened gunfire, and their government called the explosions a very abnormal act. Now, not many of Pyongyang's actions fall in the realm of normalcy, but these particular blasts come at a significant time amid an ongoing fiery rhetoric between the two Koreas, with trash balloons, propaganda drones, and nuclear threats. So what does this latest escalation mean for the two countries? Here is the report.
North Korea has destroyed two roads. The Gyeongui Line on the west coast and the Donghae Line on the east coast. These are two major road and railway links that connect North and South Korea. They were built as a cooperative project, with Seoul providing materials and equipment for their construction. And this morning, or at noon Korea time, North Korea blew up parts of the roads north of the military demarcation line, which separates the two countries. On the other side of the demarcation line, South Korea responded. Their military opened gunfire. After all, the South was prepared. Yesterday, they detected signs that Pyongyang was preparing to demolish roads. So the military had implemented countermeasures. But apart from firearms, the two governments are also embroiled in a war of words.
What North Korea has done today, blowing up the inter-Korean roads in north side of Gyeongui Line and Donghae Line, is a clear violation of the inter-Korean agreement, and we see it as a very abnormal act. And the South Korean government is strongly condemning it.
These blasts come at a time of particularly aggressive rhetoric between the two Koreas. In January this year, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un issued an order. He ditched the goal of a peaceful Korean unification. And since then, Pyongyang has laid landmines, fortified its borders, built anti-tank traps, removed railway infrastructure, intensified nuclear production efforts, strengthened its ties with Russia, and sent trash-filled balloons to the south. Inviting a tit-for-tat reaction, South Korea has strengthened its ties with the United States. Over the past year, a US aircraft carrier, amphibious assault ships, long-range bombers and submarines have visited South Korea. All of this has drawn angry rebukes from Pyongyang and fueled Kim's hasty moves. Earlier this month, he threatened to use nuclear weapons. Last week, he warned of completely cutting off territory from South Korea. But a few days ago, the situation became worse. North Korea accused the South of sending propaganda-filled drones over its capital. So yesterday, Kim called a high-level meeting. Top military and security officials were present, including his highly influential sister, Kim Yo-jong. She said, "We secured clear evidence that South Korean military gangsters are the main culprit. The provocateurs will have to pay a dear price." And apparently, her florid language worked, because a day later, North Korea has blasted 2 roads. Now, in practical terms, the explosions don't mean much. The exploded parts of the roads had not been in use for years. So their destruction makes little difference to travel routes. What matters here is the symbolism. Smoke billowing from the explosions has sent a fiery message that hostility in the Korean peninsula is far from over.
Let's turn to the war in West Asia, where it seemed that the United Nations has prevailed over Israel. New reports said that Netanyahu will not strike Iran's nuclear oil facilities. His forces will only attack Iran's military. And this should have prevented an all-out war, but then came a twist. We'll tell you all about it. As you're aware, the tension has been building for the past 2 weeks. The world has been waiting to see the scale of Israel's retaliation. You see, on the 1st of October, some 2 weeks back, Iran sent almost 200 missiles into Israel. Israel vowed to take revenge, and since then, they have exchanged threats almost every day. Now it appears that Israeli preparations are in their final stages. They are strengthening their air defenses with support from the United States, which has sent soldiers to Israel, along with the THAAD missile defense system. All this while, despite their differences, the Americans have also been in touch with Netanyahu. And reports say that he has given assurances that Israel will not target Iran's oil or nuclear facilities. Instead, they will go after Iran's military. So is Netanyahu finally giving in? For days, he's been under pressure from the United States. America is opposed to sweeping attacks on Iran. Biden has been trying to calibrate Israel's response and define clear red lines on how far they should go. An attack on an oil facility would send global crude prices soaring. And an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities would be even worse. It would invite a major response from Tehran and could consume the entire region into a wider war. So if Israel must strike back, it should target Iran's military only. Reports say Netanyahu told the US that Israel will launch a limited strike, focusing specifically on military installations. That means a more targeted response and a more tempered approach towards Iran. At least that's what Netanyahu led the US to believe. But it's not a done deal. Because look at the statement that came from his office. It said, and I'm quoting, "We listen to the opinions of the United States, but we will make our final decisions based on our national interest." So the US cannot take anything for granted. Netanyahu could still go ahead and order a sweeping attack on Iran. And he's done that before, leading the US to believe something and doing the exact opposite. Last month, after reportedly agreeing to a ceasefire, he tore up the deal. Meanwhile, the Israeli military continues to pound Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel's offensive in Lebanon is expanding. So far, only southern Lebanon and Beirut have faced strikes. But now the Israeli troops are moving north of Lebanon. They are conducting airstrikes. Israeli airplanes bombed a residential building in I2. It's a Christian village. Operations are also intensifying in the south. Israel says it has uncovered more underground tunnels.
We're now in the bunker that we found underneath a Lebanese house in a Shia village only a couple of kilometers from our border. This bunker was ready for Radwan forces, for a battalion of Radwan forces to enter into this bunker and do a raid into Israel and do a larger scale of massacre than the 7th of October. They were planned with the motorcycles here to go to Kiryat Shmona, to Iftach, to villages, and positions inside Israel and conduct a massacre.
We don't know where or when this video was filmed, but Israel has been making these claims repeatedly. It says Hezbollah was planning a large-scale attack similar to the Hamas operation on October 7th. So it has no option but to keep going. And what does Hezbollah say? They want Israel to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza.
I say to the Israeli Home Front Command, the solution is a ceasefire. We are not speaking from a position of weakness. If the Israelis do not want it, we will continue. After the ceasefire, according to the indirect agreement, the settlers will return to the north and other steps will be drawn up.
So Hezbollah wants a ceasefire, but if Israel keeps fighting, they will fight back. That's the warning from their deputy chief. Israel on its part says it is fighting to ward off a bigger threat. Today they conducted a wave of strikes across Gaza, killing more than 40 Palestinians. So will Netanyahu raise the stakes with Iran, or will the Americans prevail this time? We are closely tracking this story. The United States will vote on November 5th, and they have a tough choice: Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Who will America choose? We cannot say. It's a tight race. In national opinion polls, Trump and Harris are tied. The margins are razor thin, so they're looking for some last-minute boost, like a podcast. This one is called The Joe Rogan Experience, hosted by Joe Rogan. He has a devoted following of millions. It is by far America's most popular podcast, and Kamala Harris could join it. The Harris campaign has not confirmed it yet. These are just reports at this point. But why would Harris want to join the Joe Rogan podcast? Well, to appeal to the male voters. You see, Harris is a black woman. She has South Asian roots. Her nomination was historic, the first woman of color to lead a major party ticket. If she wins, she will be America's first female president. Some serious glass ceiling shattering right there. And that makes her popular among women. They're rallying behind her. But here's the problem. The men don't seem to care. Look at this poll. 73% men say the president's gender does not matter. And it's even more stark in two communities, the Hispanics and the blacks. Both are key Democratic voter bases. The women view Harris positively, but the men are divided. In fact, they either support Trump or they plan to sit out the elections, which is why the Joe Rogan podcast makes sense for her. 81% of his listeners are men. 56% of them are under 35 years of age. That is the voter base that Harris wants. But one podcast may not be enough. So the Democrats are rallying harder. They're bringing out the heavyweights like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
Whole election in the future of the country is turning out to be what people who were sort of on the fence about voting are going to do in the next 3.5 weeks. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. You may not think it's bad, but I mean, if you're one of them, don't feel guilty or anything, but the whole future of the country's on your back.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. I've noticed this especially with some men who seem to think Trump's behavior, the bullying and the putting people down, is a sign of strength. And I am here to tell you that is not what real strength is.
You heard Obama and Clinton, they sound desperate. And that's the sort of sentiment in the Democratic camp because they've gone down this route before. In 2016, Hillary Clinton was up against Donald Trump. She was leading in all the polls. And her campaign had one message: the historic significance of electing a female president. It did not work. Clinton lost to Trump. The glass ceiling remained intact. So Harris is wary. The doubt was always there, but now it's out in the open. Will men vote for Kamala Harris just because she's a woman? That's what the Democrats are asking. Her campaign too is worried. Aides want her to talk about topics that appeal to men, like economy and crypto. Her running mate Tim Walz is also on a media blitz. He's doing live events on streaming platform Twitch, going to football games, organizing hunts, all to appeal the male voters. So that is Kamala Harris's priority right now, which brings us to the other side, and that is the Republicans. What is Donald Trump doing? Well, he too is courting an unlikely voter base, the women of America. Traditionally, Trump's voters have always been men. In 2020, 42% women voted for Trump. 57% voted for Joe Biden. So women helped Biden seal his victory. Trump does not want a repeat of that. So he will participate in a Fox News town hall. It will focus on issues impacting women. Not just that, Trump is also ramping up the immigration rhetoric.
Kamala gets 4 more years, the entire country will be turned into a migrant camp, and that's what's happening. Millions and millions of people. When I win on November 5th, the migrant invasion ends and the restoration of our country begins. So in order to meet the goal of hiring 10,000 new agents, we need the agents. We need them badly. And keeping our incredible veteran agents on the force. Don't leave us!
So that is Donald Trump's grand plan, hiring 10,000 border guards. Immigration is a key issue in this election. Trump wants to draw more attention to it, especially in the swing states. After all, these are the states that will decide who becomes president. He's also talking about an enemy from within.
I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
Trump believes it will be a tense election day. He wants the army on the streets. Of course, that is unprecedented. America bans the use of military for civilian law enforcement. But that's Donald Trump for you. Also, it shows the turn that this election is taking. It's full of rhetoric and fear-mongering. With 3 weeks to go and campaigning in the final stretch, both sides are pulling all stops. At this point, it could go either way. Vantage continues after a short break.
The date of poll in Maharashtra would be 20th 11. Counting would be on 23rd 11/24, and you will notice that date of poll is Wednesday. This is deliberately, which lot of scheduling, whatever goes into scheduling, we have tried that it is midday, so that issue of urban apathy is handled. And in case of urban apathy, we are really very concerned. We want to make appeal through you to all our esteemed voters in the urban areas to please come and vote. It's not a healthy trend which is reflected. If I give you a brief of what is happening across the elections in the urban apathy, we will share this slide with you. If you look at various states, you look at Gurgaon, you look at Faridabad recently. Last elections, you look at Jubilee Hills, Hyderabad. You look at Bangalore South. You look at Gujarat, Gandhigram, Kolaba, Mumbai City, Pune, Thane, all are much below the state averages of each state. We will be conducting a special meeting of the municipal commissioners and DOs within a week's time to appeal again to do whatever we can do to motivate the voters in the urban areas, but the trends are really not good. If I show you the Lok Sabha, that was the Lok Sabha. If I show you legislative assemblies, see the lowest. The Kolaba was just 40%. 62 of 64 urban ACs in Maharashtra were less than the state average in 2019. So was the case in the parliamentary elections 2024 also. And just to give you a contrast, if you compare, so what was the situation in Lok Sabha in Kalyan was 50%, Mumbai South 50%, Mumbai North, Thane, Pune, Mumbai South, everything 53%. And these were the lowest 6 parliamentary constituencies out of the lowest 10. So that's the state of the urban apathy. We would be doing everything to counter it. Last time in 24 elections, we had all celebrities, all corporates, Amul, everyone involved. We'll do it again. And we'll also, at this point, emphasize that this contrasts with a very positive trend in the constituencies like Doda, 72%, Riyasi, 74%, Punch 74%, Rajouri 71%. If they can go 70 plus, Kulaba can also go 40 plus. In 24 Lok Sabha elections, Bastar was 68%, 69%. Gadchiroli, Manipur, states after state, tough areas. So we'll be requesting through you, we'll have a special drive this time for the slum areas in urban areas and also the colonies, all alike, to have a real urban push. I do not want to name specific thing, but there are booths in Faridabad and Gurgaon in the recently held elections, and they are the poshest places.